Your grandfather was just a janitor, Emma. Stop making up stories about him being some kind of hero. The principal's words cut through the classroom like a blade, making 12-year-old Emma Martinez shrink into her chair. Her classmates snickered, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "But he really did serve in Vietnam," she whispered, clutching the faded photo in her pocket. "He told me stories about saving people." The principal rolled her eyes. "Enough with the fantasies. Let's focus on real history, not your family's made-up tales." Welcome to Grateful Stories, where the most incredible acts of heroism often come from the most unlikely people, and where the truth has a way of revealing itself when we least expect it. Today's story will remind you that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry titles. Sometimes they carry mops and brooms, working quietly in the shadows while harboring secrets that could change everything. Let's uncover what really happened when a young girl's faith in her grandfather's legacy was tested, and how one moment on live television turned a nobody into a somebody, proving that the greatest heroes are often hiding in plain sight. Emma Martinez had always been proud of her grandfather, Roberto Martinez. While other kids talked about their grandparents' careers as doctors, lawyers, or business owners, Emma would beam when she spoke about Grandpa Roberto's job as a school janitor. But it wasn't his profession that made her proud. It was the stories he told her during their quiet moments together. Roberto would sit with Emma on his small apartment balcony, his weathered hands holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "Mija," he would say, his voice carrying the weight of decades, "your old grandfather wasn't always pushing a mop around these halls. There was a time when I carried something much heavier." He would touch the small scar on his left shoulder, barely visible beneath his worn t-shirt. "In Vietnam, we had a saying, 'You don't leave anyone behind, not ever.'" Emma cherished these moments, hanging on every word as Roberto told her about his time as a medic in the war, how he had saved 17 soldiers during a particularly brutal battle, how he had crawled through enemy fire to reach wounded comrades, how he had earned medals that now sat forgotten in a shoebox under his bed because he said the real heroes never made it home. But Emma's world crumbled the day she decided to share these stories at school. It was during a presentation about family heroes, and she had prepared with such enthusiasm. She brought Roberto's few remaining photographs from Vietnam, his faded dog tags, and the letter of commendation that he had shown her only once. She spoke with passion about her grandfather's bravery, about how he had saved lives while risking his own. The reaction was not what she expected. First came the whispers, then the barely contained laughter. "Your janitor grandfather was a war hero," one classmate had asked with obvious disbelief. "My dad says custodians just make up stories to feel important." The teacher had smiled politely, but Emma could see the doubt in her eyes. The principal's harsh words were just the final blow to her already breaking heart. Walking home that day, Emma felt more alone than ever. The photo in her pocket seemed to weigh nothing now, just a piece of paper with an old man's fantasy printed on it. When she reached Roberto's apartment, she found him in his usual spot on the balcony, still wearing his janitor's uniform from his shift at the elementary school. "How was your presentation, Mija?" he asked, his eyes lighting up with genuine interest. Emma looked at her grandfather, really looked at him. She saw the stained uniform, the tired lines around his eyes, the calloused hands that smelled of cleaning chemicals. For the first time, doubt crept into her heart. "Grandpa," she said slowly, "did you really do all those things in Vietnam? Did you really save all those people?" Roberto's face fell slightly, and Emma immediately regretted the question. But she needed to know. She needed to understand why everyone else seemed so sure that her grandfather was just a janitor with an overactive imagination. Roberto was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city skyline. "Sometimes, Mija, the world forgets about people like us. We become invisible, just part of the background, but that doesn't mean what we did didn't matter." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. I've never shown this to anyone except you. It's a letter from one of the boys I saved. He wrote it 20 years after the war. Emma took the letter with trembling hands. It was addressed to Roberto Martinez, and the return address was from a place called Arlington, Virginia. The handwriting was shaky, but earnest. You probably don't remember me, but you saved my life in 1968. I was just 18, scared, and bleeding out in a rice paddy when you crawled through hell to get to me. I've spent 40 years trying to find you to say thank you. Because of you, I got to come home, marry my sweetheart, and raise 3 beautiful children. You are the reason I'm alive today. Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes as she read the letter. At the bottom, scrawled in faded ink, was a name, Thomas Bradley, and beneath it, Colonel United States Army retired. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the letter, about her grandfather's stories, and about the cruel laughter of her classmates. She made a decision that would change everything. If the world had forgotten about her grandfather's heroism, maybe it was time to remind them. Emma spent the next few weeks researching. She learned how to use the library's microfilm machine, how to search military databases online, and how to write formal letters. She discovered that her grandfather had indeed served in Vietnam as a combat medic with the 1st Infantry Division. She found records of his unit's actions, casualty reports that mentioned unnamed medics who had performed extraordinary acts of bravery. But finding proof wasn't enough. Emma wanted the world to know. She started writing letters to newspapers, to television stations, to anyone who might listen. Most went unanswered, but she didn't give up. She wrote to the Department of Veterans Affairs, to her congressman, and even to the White House. Her letters were heartfelt pleas for recognition, for acknowledgement of what her grandfather had done for his country. Months passed with no response. Emma's faith began to waver again, especially when the teasing at school continued. Some kids had started calling her fantasy girl because of her presentation about her grandfather. The principal would shake her head whenever she saw Emma in the hallways, as if she were looking at a child who couldn't distinguish between reality and imagination. Roberto noticed his granddaughter's sadness, but said nothing. He continued to work his shifts at the elementary school, mopping floors and cleaning bathrooms with the same quiet dignity he had always shown. But Emma could see something had changed in him too. The stories stopped. The evening conversations on the balcony became shorter, more subdued. It was as if the doubt that had infected Emma's heart was spreading to his as well. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September, and Emma was at home with her grandmother while Roberto worked his shift. The television was on in the background, broadcasting a live ceremony from the White House. President Trump was hosting a Medal of Honor ceremony for Vietnam veterans whose heroism had been overlooked or forgotten. Emma wasn't paying much attention until she heard the president's voice say something that made her blood freeze. Today, we honor not just the recipients of these medals, but all the unsung heroes who served alongside them. Men like Roberto Martinez, a combat medic who saved 17 lives during the Battle of Loc Ninh, crawling through enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers. Emma's grandmother dropped her coffee cup, the ceramic shattering on the kitchen floor. Emma stood frozen, staring at the television screen as President Trump continued. Roberto Martinez represents the thousands of heroes who came home to quiet lives, who never sought recognition for their extraordinary service. They became teachers, mechanics, store clerks, and yes, even janitors, but their service was no less heroic for the humility with which they carried themselves afterward. The camera panned to the audience, and there in the front row sat an elderly man in a military uniform. The graphic at the bottom of the screen read, "Colonel Thomas Bradley, Medal of Honor recipient." Emma recognized the name immediately. It was the man who had written the letter to her grandfather. President Trump wasn't finished. The Colonel Bradley specifically requested that we mention Roberto Martinez today. He told us that without Roberto's actions in 1968, he wouldn't be here to receive this honor. He said that Roberto Martinez is the reason he lived to serve his country for 30 more years, the reason he got to raise a family, the reason he got to make a difference in this world. The ceremony continued, but Emma could barely hear it over the sound of her own heartbeat. Her grandfather's name had been spoken by the President of the United States on live television. The man, she had been told, was a nobody whose stories had been dismissed as fantasy, had just been recognized as a hero in front of the entire nation. Emma's phone started buzzing. Text messages from classmates who had seen the broadcast. Messages from neighbors who knew her grandfather. Even a message from her school principal. "Emma, I owe you and your grandfather an apology. I had no idea." When Roberto came home from work that evening, he found Emma and her grandmother waiting for him with tears in their eyes. "Grandpa," Emma said, running to hug him, "the whole world knows now. They know what you did. They know you're a hero." Roberto looked confused until Emma's grandmother explained what had happened. As the reality of the situation sank in, Roberto didn't smile or celebrate. Instead, he sat down heavily in his chair and looked at his granddaughter with eyes full of love and sadness. "Mia," he said quietly, "I never needed the world to know. I only needed you to believe in me, even when it was hard, even when everyone else said I was just making up stories. Your faith in me meant more than any medal or recognition ever could." Emma felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the true lesson her grandfather had been trying to teach her all along. It wasn't about being recognized or celebrated. It was about doing what's right, regardless of whether anyone notices or cares. It was about carrying yourself with dignity, even when the world tries to make you feel invisible. The next day at school was different. Emma walked through the hallways with her head held high, not because her grandfather had been vindicated on national television, but because she finally understood what real heroism looked like. It wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about getting up every morning and doing what needed to be done, whether you were crawling through a rice paddy to save a wounded soldier or mopping floors to keep a school clean for children. The principal approached her during lunch, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Emma, I want to apologize for not believing you. I want to invite your grandfather to speak at our Veterans Day assembly. The whole school should hear his story." Emma smiled politely but shook her head. "Thank you, but I don't think Grandpa would want that. He's not the kind of person who seeks attention. He just wants to do his job and take care of his family." That evening, Emma found Roberto in his usual spot on the balcony. But this time, she was the one with stories to tell. She told him about the apology from the principal, about the newfound respect from her classmates, about the phone calls from reporters wanting to interview him. Roberto listened patiently, then smiled. "You know what this means, Mija. It means you learned the most important lesson of all. Real heroes don't need the world to tell them they're heroes. They just need to know they made a difference, even if only one person believes in them." Emma nodded, understanding flooding through her. "Like how I believed in you." "Like how you believed in me," Roberto confirmed. "And now I need you to believe in something else. I need you to believe that you have that same courage inside you. The courage to stand up for what's right, even when everyone else says you're wrong. The courage to be kind when the world is cruel. The courage to serve others, even if no one ever thanks you for it." As they sat together watching the sunset, Emma realized that her grandfather had been teaching her about heroism all along. Not through his war stories, but through his daily example of quiet dignity, selfless service, and unwavering love for his family. The recognition from the president was nice, but it wasn't what made Roberto Martinez a hero. What made him a hero was the way he had lived his life every single day since coming home from Vietnam. The way he had raised his family, the way he had served his community, and the way he had taught his granddaughter that being a hero isn't about what the world thinks of you, it's about what you do when no one is watching. Sometimes the greatest heroes are hiding in plain sight, wearing janitor uniforms instead of military medals, pushing mops instead of giving speeches, and teaching life lessons in quiet moments on apartment balconies. They don't need the world to recognize them because they know that real heroism isn't about fame or glory. It's about love, service, and the quiet courage to do what's right, one day at a time. Emma learned that day that she didn't need the President of the United States to validate her grandfather's heroism. She had always known he was a hero, not because of what he did in Vietnam, but because of who he was every single day afterward. And that's a lesson worth more than any medal or recognition the world could ever offer.